She stood in the middle of her crumbling pasture, 5 donkeys grazing peacefully behind her, while a line of luxury cars stretched down her dirt road for half a mile in both directions. Mercedes, BMWs, a Rolls-Royce. They were not there for the view, they were there for milk, donkey milk. The same milk the regional dairy board had laughed at 6 months earlier when Sarah had presented her business plan with trembling hands. The same milk her neighbours said nobody in their right mind would ever buy. And yet here they were, those same neighbours, standing at the back of the line with empty coolers in their hands and desperation in their eyes, begging her to sell them just 1 pint. 1 single pint of what they had called the most disgusting idea in farming history. Sarah Mitchell had sold her barn, her last piece of dignity, to buy 5 donkeys everyone called stupid. Now those 5 stupid donkeys were making more money in one morning than her entire cattle operation had made in 3 years. And the people who mocked her the loudest were now the ones paying the most. But this story does not start with success. It starts with a woman sitting on her kitchen floor at 2 in the morning, her back against the cheap laminate cabinets her husband had installed 8 years ago, holding a foreclosure notice that said she had exactly 30 days to come up with $47,000, or lose everything her grandfather had built with his own calloused hands in 1952. Sarah was 34 years old. She had buried her husband 18 months earlier after a tractor accident on a hillside that nobody could have predicted, a mechanical failure in the steering column that sent him over an embankment and into a dry creek bed where he died before the ambulance could reach him. She was now the last Mitchell standing on 120 acres of Texas hill country that the bank was itching to take back and parcel off to developers who wanted to build vacation homes for people from Dallas. Her cattle herd, once 200 head strong, and the pride of her family's 3-generation operation, was down to 11 scrawny cows that the auction house would not even send a truck for because the fuel cost would exceed what the animals were worth. Her truck, a Ford F-250 that her husband had maintained like it was a member of the family, had a cracked engine block that would cost $6,000 to replace, which was $6,000 more than she had. Her well, drilled in 1978 and reliable for decades, had run dry in the relentless summer heat, forcing her to haul water in plastic barrels from her cousin's property 3 miles away, and her own mother, the woman who should have been her refuge, had told her at the funeral reception that she should have married a banker instead of a dreamer, that she had always been too stubborn for her own good, and that maybe losing the farm was the universe's way of telling her to start over somewhere sensible. That was tragedy. Layer 1, the personal one, the one that hollowed out her chest and made breathing feel like a conscious effort every single morning. Layer 2 came the following Tuesday, when the county assessor drove out to her property in a white truck, with the county seal on the door, walked her broken fences with a clipboard and a tape measure, looked at her empty hay barn with its roof that sagged in the middle like a tired old horse, and told her that even if she sold every blade of grass, every fence post, every rusted piece of equipment, and the remaining 11 cows for whatever she could get, she would still be $18,000 short of what she owed the bank. Her credit was destroyed. Her savings, which had never been substantial to begin with, were gone. She had already sold her wedding ring to a pawn shop in Austin for $800, her husband's tools to a mechanic in San Marcos for $1,200, and the antique tractor that had been in his family for 3 generations to a collector from Houston who had driven down specifically to take advantage of her desperation. There was nothing left to sell except the barn itself, the only structure on the property that was still worth anything to anyone because it had good bones, a metal roof that did not leak, and enough square footage to be converted into something else by someone with money and imagination. And layer 3, the one that cut the deepest and bled the longest, was the afternoon she walked into the Hill Country Feed and Supply to ask Dale, the owner, for another extension on her account, which was already 90 days past due. She was standing in the aisle between the chicken feed and the deworming medicine when she heard 3 men she had known since childhood, men whose children she had babysat, men whose weddings she had attended, laughing about how the Mitchell place was finally going under. They said Sarah had always been too stubborn for her own good, that she should have sold out after her husband died instead of pretending she could run a farm by herself, and how it was about time somebody with real farming sense bought that land and put it to proper use instead of letting it sit there like a monument to failure. She did not confront them. She did not have the energy or the words. She walked out of the feed store, got into her broken truck, and cried for 40 minutes in the parking lot while the August sun turned the steering wheel too hot to touch, and the vinyl seat burned the backs of her thighs through her jeans. That was the day she decided she would rather burn the whole place down than let those men watch her fail. That was the day she decided that if she was going to lose everything, she was going to lose it on her own terms, doing something so unexpected that they would never be able to tell the story without admitting they had been wrong. The problem was she had absolutely no idea what to do instead. For 3 agonizing months, Sarah tried everything she could think of to save the farm without selling the barn. She bought 20 Nigerian dwarf goats after reading online that goat milk sex was selling for $8 a gallon in the city. She spent her last $1,200 on fencing, feed, and a second-hand milking stand she found on Craigslist. Within 6 weeks, 7 of the goats had escaped through a hole she did not know existed. 3 had gotten into her neighbor's soybean field and caused $4,000 in damage, and the remaining 10 produced so little milk that she was spending more on feed than she was making back at the farmer's market. A woman from Austin bought 1 pint, took a sip, and asked for her money back because she said it tasted like the goat had eaten nothing but wild onions and diesel fuel. That was failure number 1. Failure number 2 came when she decided to pivot to organic vegetables. She cleared half an acre by hand because she could not afford to rent equipment, planted tomatoes and peppers that were supposed to fetch premium prices, and watched a hailstorm the size of golf balls destroy the entire crop 3 days before harvest. The insurance check, when it finally came, was for $940. Her investment had been close to $4,000. She sat in the ruined field and picked up hailstones that were still melting in the September heat, wondering if the universe was actively trying to tell her something. Failure number 3 was the beehives. Everyone said local honey was liquid gold. She bought 3 hives from a retiring beekeeper, read every book the library had, and suited up every morning to check on her new colony. The bees swarmed in the second week of May, all 3 hives at once, and flew off into the mesquite trees, never to return. The beekeeper stopped answering her calls. She was out another $1,500, and she had nothing left. Nothing except a barn that was worth maybe $30,000 to the right buyer, and a heart that was so tired of losing she could barely get out of bed in the morning. She put the barn on the market on a Thursday in late October, right after the first cold front of the season blew through and made her house feel even emptier than it already was. By Saturday morning, she had an offer from a developer from Austin who wanted to turn the barn into a wedding venue with string lights and mason jar centerpieces. $28,000. It would clear most of her debt, leave her with a small amount to survive on for a few months. But it would also mean the end of the Mitchell farm as anything other than a memory. She signed the papers on Sunday night after drinking 2 glasses of wine she could not afford, sat on her porch with a cup of coffee that was more cream than coffee because she was out of grounds, and asked herself what she was supposed to do now. How do you rebuild a life when you have sold the last thing that connected you to your history? How do you look your husband's grave in the eye when you have sold the barn he was born in, the barn where he had proposed to her, the barn where they had danced to country music on their wedding night while fireflies lit up the Texas darkness? She did not have answers. She only had the cold air and the silence and the overwhelming sense that she had failed everyone who had ever believed in her. That was when she saw the ad. It was not even a real advertisement. It was a classified listing on a farming forum she had joined years ago and never looked at since. Someone in rural New Mexico was trying to get rid of 5 standard donkeys, all females, all supposedly gentle and halter-broken, for $500 total. The listing had been up for 3 months. Nobody wanted them. The owner had written that he was moving to Albuquerque to live with his daughter, and if he could not find a buyer by the end of the week, he was taking them to the livestock auction in Roswell, where they would likely sell for meat prices. Sarah stared at the photograph of the 5 donkeys standing in a muddy pen, their ears too long and too expressive, their coats too shaggy, their eyes too calm and too knowing, like they had already seen the worst that life could offer and were still standing. She had never owned a donkey in her life. She had never milked a donkey. She had never even tasted donkey milk. But she had $28,000 from the barn sale, sitting in her checking account, burning a hole in her sense of responsibility, and she had a desperate need to do something so unexpected that the men at the feed store would choke on their coffee when they heard about it. She called the number. The man answered on the 3rd ring, sounded exhausted, and said she could have all 5 for $400 if she could pick them up by Friday, because he was leaving Saturday morning and could not take them with him. She rented a livestock trailer from a man in town who felt sorry for her and charged her half his normal rate, drove 14 hours through West Texas and into New Mexico with nothing but a thermos of coffee and a bag of beef jerky, and loaded 5 donkeys onto her truck while the previous owner shook his head and told her she was making the biggest mistake of her already mistake-heavy life. He called them stupid animals repeatedly. He said they were stubborn, slow good for absolutely nothing except eating hay and making noise at 3 in the morning. He said he had tried to give them away to a petting zoo, and they had said no because donkeys were not exciting enough for children. Sarah did not argue with him. She named them on the drive home, speaking to them through the slats of the trailer in a soft voice that she had not used in months, because there had been nobody to speak softly to. Daisy, the oldest, with a grey muzzle and patient eyes. Pearl, the largest, with a white patch on her forehead. Ruby, the reddish-brown one with a personality that showed itself in the way she kicked the trailer wall when Sarah stopped too fast. Luna, the quiet one who stood in the corner and watched everything. And the smallest one, the one with a patch of grey fur over her left eye, she named Hope. When Sarah pulled into her driveway at 3 in the morning, her neighbour Earl was waiting on his porch with a shotgun across his knees because he had heard the trailer and thought someone was stealing her property. When he saw the donkeys step down onto her gravel driveway in the beam of her headlights, he laughed so hard he had to sit down on his porch steps. He told her he had seen some genuinely dumb ideas in his 72 years, but selling a perfectly good barn to buy 5 stupid donkeys was the absolute pinnacle of poor decision-making. Sarah smiled, a real smile that surprised her own face, unloaded her donkeys into the pasture that used to hold 200 head of cattle, and went to sleep for the first time in months, feeling like she had made a choice that was entirely her own. That was the turning point. But the real discovery, the moment that would change everything, came 2 weeks later. Entirely by accident, Sarah was milking Daisy. She was not even trying to start a business yet. She was just experimenting, curious, learning the anatomy of a donkey udder, which was smaller and more delicate than a cow's, requiring a gentler touch and more patience than she had ever needed with her cattle. Daisy tolerated it surprisingly well, standing still, while Sarah sat on a low stool and squeezed milk into a stainless steel bucket, her hands cramping from the unfamiliar motion. She had maybe half a gallon, cloudy and thin compared to cow's milk, with a slightly sweet smell that she could not quite identify. She was filtering it through cheesecloth into mason jars when a woman drove up her driveway in a white Tesla with California plates, and a look of desperate hope on her face that Sarah recognized from her own mirror. The woman was a cosmetic chemist from Los Angeles who had been searching for raw donkey milk for a skincare line she was developing for a boutique brand that sold exclusively to high-end spas and celebrity clients. She had heard, through some impossible chain of connections, that there was a woman in Texas with donkeys. She offered Sarah $40 for 1 pint of milk, cash, right there. No questions asked. Sarah, thinking it was some kind of elaborate joke, laughed and then stopped when she saw the woman was holding 2 crisp $20 bills and was not smiling. She handed the woman a mason jar of milk she had just finished filtering, still warm from Daisy's body. The woman handed her the $40, unscrewed the lid, smelled the milk like it was the finest perfume in the world, closed her eyes in what looked like religious ecstasy, and asked if she could come back next Tuesday for 10 more pints. She said she would pay up front. She said she would sign a contract. Sarah stood in her driveway, holding $40 for something her donkeys produced naturally every single day. Something she had been pouring into the compost pile because she did not know what else to do with it, and felt the first spark of something she had not felt in a very long time. Possibility. Real, tangible, terrifying possibility. She drove to the library that afternoon, used the computer because her internet had been shut off for non-payment, and spent 4 hours reading about donkey milk. What she found changed her understanding of everything she thought she knew about dairy farming. Year 1 was not glamorous. It was not Instagram-worthy. It was Sarah learning how to milk 5 donkeys twice a day without getting kicked, without spilling the precious liquid that was now worth more per ounce than anything she had ever produced. Donkey milk, she learned through frantic late-night research, had been used for thousands of years by civilization understood its properties, that understood its long before modern science could explain them. Cleopatra was said to have bathed in it. Hippocrates prescribed it for various ailments. Modern science had confirmed what ancient wisdom knew, that donkey milk was chemically closest to human breast milk, packed with vitamins, low in fat, rich in lactose, and hypoallergenic in ways that cow and goat milk could never match. In Europe, particularly in Italy and France and Greece, donkey milk was already selling for 20 to 30 euros per litre in specialty shops. In America, the market was practically non-existent, which meant Sarah was either too early or too crazy. She chose to believe she was early. She built a small milking parlour out of salvaged lumber and second-hand stainless steel equipment she found at auction. She spent $300 on packaging that looked professional, instead of homemade glass bottles with her farm's name printed in elegant script. She drove to Austin every Saturday morning at 4 a.m. with a cooler full of milk packed in ice, set up a booth at the farmer's market, and stood there while most people walked past her laughing until one person stopped, tried a sample, and came back the next week with 5 friends. By month 6, she was selling out every Saturday by 9 in the morning, her cooler empty, her pockets full of cash. By month 9, she had a waiting list of 47 families who wanted regular weekly deliveries because their children could not tolerate cow's milk. By the end of year 1, those 5 stupid donkeys had generated enough revenue to pay off the remaining bank debt completely, repair her well, and buy a used truck that actually ran. She had gone from bankrupt widow to functioning business owner. And the journey had happened so gradually that she sometimes forgot to notice how far she had come until someone reminded her. Year 2 was about scale and systems. Sarah bought 10 more donkeys, all rescued from auctions and neglect situations, all female, all with stories that her customers fell in love with, because Sarah shared them on the simple website she had built using a free template. She hired a part-time employee, a college student named Marcus, who had grown up on a dairy farm and knew more about milk handling and pasteurization than she ever would. He was 21, covered in tattoos, and treated every donkey like it was a princess. She invested in a small pasteurization setup that cost $8,000, obtained the proper state licenses, and spent 3 months navigating bureaucracy. 3 stores in Austin agreed to carry her milk on a trial basis. It sold out in the first week at all 3 locations. A local news station heard about the woman who sold her barn to buy donkeys and did a 5-minute feature that aired on the evening news, showing Sarah walking through her pasture while Daisy and Pearl followed her like oversized dogs. Suddenly, her phone would not stop ringing. Restaurants wanted donkey milk for their cheese programs. A chocolate maker in San Antonio wanted it for a limited edition truffle line. A naturopathic clinic in Dallas wanted 50 pints a week for their patients. Sarah went from milking 10 donkeys by hand to managing a small dairy operation with 15 milking stations, a walk-in cooler, and a delivery route that covered 3 counties. She was working harder than she had ever worked in her life, but for the first time since her husband died, she was not afraid of the future. Year 3 was the frenzy. A celebrity chef in Houston, with 2 million Instagram followers, posted a photograph of a panna cotta he had made using Sarah's donkey milk, describing it as the most delicate, most luxurious dairy experience of his entire career. The dessert cost $45 per serving and sold out every night for 3 months. The post went viral. Within 48 hours, Sarah had over 2,000 direct messages from people wanting to know where they could buy donkey milk. National food blogs picked up the story. A morning show in New York called and asked if she could ship milk to their studio for a segment. She said no, she could not ship fresh milk across the country, but she could tell them where to find it if they came to Texas. They came. They brought cameras and lights and producers. They filmed her walking through her pasture with 20 donkeys following her like a parade. And they asked her how she went from losing everything to building something that nobody in American agriculture had ever seen before. She told them the truth. She said she got desperate enough to stop listening to the people who told her what she could not do, and brave enough to try something that everyone said was stupid. Before I tell you what happened next, I need to ask you something important. Where are you watching this story from right now? Drop your city or your country in the comments below. I read every single comment, and I want to know how far this story is traveling and who is listening out there in the world. The numbers, because I know you have been waiting for them, are staggering in a way that still makes Sarah shake her head when she looks at her books. In year 3, Sarah's donkey dairy operation generated $470,000 in total revenue, a figure that would have seemed like fantasy to the woman sitting on her kitchen floor, holding a foreclosure notice. Her profit margin, after accounting for feed costs, labor for 3 full-time employees, equipment maintenance, veterinary care, licensing fees, packaging, and fuel for delivery, was 62%. She was selling donkey milk at $28 per pint in her direct-to-consumer subscription program, $18 per pint, wholesale to specialty grocery stores, and $12 per pint in bulk to commercial clients. Her herd had grown from the original 5 donkeys to 34 active milking females, with another 12 pregnant and due in the spring, which would bring her total to 46. She had 3 full-time employees, including Marcus, who was now her operations manager, and had dropped out of college because he said he was learning more running a donkey dairy than he ever would in a classroom. She had 2 part-time delivery drivers who covered the routes she could not manage herself. She had a waiting list so long she had stopped adding names to it 3 months ago because she could not stand the idea of disappointing people she had no capacity to serve. The barn that she sold for $28,000 in desperation was now dwarfed by the new milking facility she had built for $120,000. Paid for in cash from her first 18 months of profits, with proper drainage and ventilation, and a viewing window where customers could watch the milking process. Her property, which the bank had valued at barely enough to cover her original debt, was now worth over $800,000, according to a recent appraisal that included her infrastructure, her brand, her customer base, and her position as the largest donkey dairy operation in the state of Texas. But the number that mattered most to Sarah, the number she kept written on a sticky note above her desk, was not on any spreadsheet. It was the number of families who wrote to her saying that her donkey milk was the only dairy their severely allergic child could tolerate without breaking out in hives. It was the number of cancer patients who sent handwritten messages saying the milk helped them keep weight on during chemotherapy, when nothing else would stay down. It was the number of emails she received from women who had lost their farms, their husbands, their hope, and who said her story gave them permission to try something that sounded crazy. That number was in the thousands, and it was growing every single day. And Sarah answered every message personally, even if it took her until midnight, because she remembered what it felt like to be alone and afraid and desperate for proof that survival was possible. The people who laughed at her the loudest were now her best customers and her biggest supporters. Earl, the neighbour who had laughed so hard he had to sit down on his porch steps when she unloaded the donkeys, now managed her hay supply, negotiating with suppliers to get her the best quality alfalfa at the best prices, because he said he had never seen anything like it in his entire life. The men from the feed store who had mocked her foreclosure came to her grand opening of the new facility and asked if she was hiring because their own operations were struggling. She hired 2 of them, not because she needed to prove anything, but because she knew exactly what it felt like to have nobody believe in you. And she believed that people could change when they saw what was possible if you refused to quit. She believed in second chances because she had been given a 1 by 5 donkeys that nobody else wanted. She believed in redemption because she was living it every single day. And she believed that the measure of a person was not how they handled success, but how they handled being told they were stupid. How they handled the moment when everything they loved was about to be taken away, and they had to choose between surrender and the kind of courage that looks like madness until it works. Sarah Mitchell did not set out to build a donkey milk empire. She did not wake up one morning with a business plan and investor backing. She set out to survive. She set out to keep her grandfather's land in the family for one more season, one more year, one more impossible dream that everyone else had already given up on. What she discovered was that the moment you stop trying to impress these people who want you to fail is the exact moment you become dangerous. Dangerous to the doubters who need you to stay small so they can feel big. Dangerous to the status quo that depends on everyone following the same rules. Dangerous to the voice inside your own head that says you are not enough, that you are too broken, that you have lost too much to ever win again. Those 5 stupid donkeys were not stupid at all. They were patient in a way that modern life does not value. They were steady in a way that success requires. They produced something valuable every single day, without complaining, without quitting, without worrying about what the neighbors thought. Sarah learned to be the same way. She learned that the best ideas often look like the worst ideas right up until the moment they change everything, and that the difference between a crazy person and a visionary is usually just timing and persistence. She learned that selling your barn to buy donkeys is only crazy if the donkeys fail, and the only way to guarantee failure is to never try at all. If you are sitting somewhere right now, watching this, feeling like you have lost too much to start over, feeling like the world has already decided, your story ends in defeat. I want you to remember something that Sarah learned on her kitchen floor and proved in her pasture. The same people who will laugh at your first step will beg for your attention at your finish line. The same community that writes you off will line up at your door when you prove them wrong. Not because they are hypocrites, but because they are human, and humans are drawn to proof that the impossible can be done. The only question is whether you will keep walking long enough to see it happen. Whether you will keep milking the donkeys when nobody is buying. Whether you will keep showing up when the only reward is your own stubborn refusal to quit. Sarah did. She walked through foreclosure and grief and hailstorms and empty beehives and goats that tasted like onions and a well that ran dry. She walked through 14 hours to New Mexico and back, through milking donkeys at 5 in the morning, while her hands cramped and her back ached. She walked through driving to Austin every weekend with a cooler and a prayer. She walked until the walking became running, and the running became flying, and the flying became a life she could never have imagined when she was sitting on her kitchen floor at 2 in the morning holding a piece of paper that said she had 30 days. You have more than 30 days. You have today, and today is enough to take one step toward the thing that scares you, the thing that everyone says is stupid, the thing that might just be the thing that saves you. Because the thing that scares you is almost always the thing that will save you if you let it. If this story moved you, if Sarah's journey reminded you of your own strength, then hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of people who refused to stay down. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. And remember, the next time somebody calls your dream stupid, smile. Thank them for their opinion, and go build something so undeniable that they will have to stand in line just to say they knew you when. That is the power of showing up when nobody believes you will. That is the power of not quitting when quitting is the only reasonable option. That is the power of 5 stupid donkeys and 1 woman who decided that losing everything was not the end of her story, but only the first chapter of a much better one that she was going to write herself, 1 pint of milk at a time, until the impossible became inevitable, and the inevitable became extraordinary.